Now we will be welcoming Dr. Ndoro, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Marketing Management at the University of Pretoria. He has over 15 years of teaching and research experience, and he has published journal articles in the field of marketing and psychology. So please give him a warm round of applause as we welcome him to begin his presentation. Thank you.
All right, afternoon, everyone. I trust you've had a very insightful conference since yesterday, and yeah, I trust you are still lively up until now. So for my presentation, I'm actually going to be focusing mostly on occupational intelligence, but I want to just give you just an overview of just my background and how I have this passion for occupational stuff related to occupational intelligence and occupational workplace and so on. So I began my career straight from masters. I became an academic, so I became a junior lecturer quite a while ago, because if it's now 15 years, I think that's indicative of the time when I started to lecture. So when I became an academic, I started off by lecturing industrial psychology. I'm not sure if I can have... Okay, so I started off by being an academic in industrial psychology at Rhodes University. And then I taught for years at Rhodes University, so I became a mentor to a lot of students, because I think I was also still fairly young, so a lot of students could relate to me. And so I was a mentor for a lot of the students in SRC, in leadership, and so on. And then, and then I transitioned from industrial psychology. And industrial psychology is mostly about the workplace. So it speaks to the psychology of the human being in the workplace. So it speaks to how can people optimally work in a workplace. It speaks to issues of teamwork. It speaks to issues of emotional intelligence and so on within the workplace. So in other words, actually industrial psychology is more of psychology applied within the workplace. So, so then my role at Rhodes University when I was an academic, I was teaching industrial psychology. I would also mentor a lot of students, especially in SRC. And some of these students, I would mentor them, and some of them were my own students. And then afterwards, they would come back. Some of them would come back after having left Rhodes, having worked a bit in the private sector. They would come back for their post-grad qualifications. So over those years, I got a sense of the dynamics in the world of work. And I got a sense of the students that I taught who would excel. Because I do keep tabs with a lot of my students. Some of them are actually now in government, some of them own businesses and so on, right? So I do keep tabs, and I've seen over the years my students who tend to excel out there. So some students I've seen, they do very well in class, right? You have some students who are very diligent, they excel academically. And then you also have some students who academically they're good, yes, but when they're out in the world of work, they really excel. So these are some of the things, observations that I've seen over the past 15, 16 years that I've engaged with students and that I've actually worked in the field of psychology. Okay, so ultimately, I know and I've seen over the past that there are certain skills, certain traits that you need to embrace, okay? And these traits and these skills, you can start embracing them even now because ultimately, in the long term, those skills, those traits will allow you to have an edge in the world of work. Okay, so I want to just start by defining. So I think let's just start by looking at what is occupational intelligence. Maybe let's just start with a basic definition. What is intelligence? I'd assume you've all come across that word, right? Intelligence. You've come across the word intelligence. Can anyone maybe tell me what you think the word intelligence is? Okay. This is not class. You're not going to get marks for this. It's just so don't hold back. And you also had a presentation on public speaking and so on. So don't be shy. Just talk. From the security studies perspective, intelligence is strategic information. Okay, so it's strategic information. Okay, good. Strategic information, intelligence. Good. Any other thoughts? Intelligence. I mean, I would assume that when you're growing up, you'd hear people saying so-and-so is intelligent. Maybe you were intelligent. Probably being a scholar, it's a sign. I would assume you used to hear that word a lot. you're intelligent, you're intelligent. Okay. So the ability to understand, to comprehend, and to interpret certain stuff, according to you. Okay, good. Any other thoughts? Intelligence. Okay. Your level of awareness on a specific subject. So I remember, I think back then, when I was lecturing first years at Rhodes, so I was teaching this module on intelligence. So in Psychology 101, you have different modules. One is on personality, and one is on intelligence, one on industrial psychology. So I was taking a module on intelligence. And then I had a picture of a young boy. So I just showed my students, my first years, I showed them a picture of a young boy in the rural areas, and he was herding cattle. Very small boy. And you could see, yes, he was walking barefooted in the rural areas. He was walking on a dust road, on a dirt road, with cows in front of him. And then I recall I asked my students, would you say this boy is intelligent? That was the question. So I just asked them, this boy who you're seeing, who's herding cattle in some rural area, right? And you can see he's walking barefooted and so on. Would you say he's intelligent? Okay. So I wanted to get a sense of their comprehension of intelligence. And then one student who was quite brave raised a hand, and then she indicated to me that, yeah, this boy, he doesn't look intelligent, or he's not intelligent. Okay, and then I asked her, why would you say he's not intelligent? Because obviously this is the first year, right? First year, Psychology 101. And then she indicated to me that, no, this boy is not intelligent because I'd assume that he's coming from a very humble background, maybe poverty-stricken, so there might be an element of malnutrition. So he's not intelligent. Okay, and then I said, okay, no, it's fine. And then I indicated now to the class that this boy, in reality, is actually more intelligent than me, your lecturer. Okay, so I told them he's actually more intelligent than me, your lecturer, right now. And they looked at me, they were a bit perplexed. And then I indicated to them that, okay, ultimately, this boy, what he does, okay? He herds cattle because in that picture, you could see he's herding cattle in a very complex terrain, okay? In a very harsh environment, okay? So I indicated to them that, okay, this boy clearly every day probably wakes up at 4, okay? He goes, he opens up the crawl, and he starts herding his cattle. He knows all these cows, okay? And throughout the day, wherever he goes, he's able to navigate the terrain. And he will never lose any of his cows. But probably if you give me, okay, if I find myself in this situation, and I'm expected to wake up at 4:30, okay, and then I have to herd the cows throughout the day, there might be a chance that, for starters, I'll lose some of the cows, okay? I might lose them, okay? And also there might be a chance that throughout the day, because we could see in that picture that it was a very arid environment, very hot environment. I told them that you might find that by the end of the day, probably I would have gone through dehydration, okay? So I would have gone through dehydration. Probably if I get injured, if something cuts me, okay, I'll just be bleeding and bleeding, okay? So in that specific context, this boy, what he can do, I cannot do it, okay? I cannot do it owing to the fact that probably owing to my socialization. Maybe, yes, I would herd cattle here and there, or maybe I never actually did herd any cattle. So owing to my socialization in my context, this worldview, I'm not an expert in this worldview, okay? This worldview, this boy in this worldview, in this reality, he's an expert, okay? He's able every day in the morning to herd cattle and to come back at home in the evening with his cattle. If he gets injured, he's able to treat himself. He knows what trees to go to and to stop the bleeding and so on, right? But if I find myself in that situation, I might actually be in trouble, okay? But now if you talk about Psychology 1, then people can say I'm more intelligent than this boy, okay? Because if you give this boy a Psychology 1 test, clearly he'll struggle, okay? Because in that worldview of Psychology 1, he's not an expert, okay? So ultimately where I was getting to with my class, and ultimately where I'm getting to is the fact that with intelligence is situational, okay? It's contextual, okay? And intelligence speaks to how we can effectively solve problems in our context, okay? how we can adapt to our context. So how can you effectively adapt to your context, any given context, be it the world of work or wherever? And how do you effectively solve problems in that context? Because in any given context, you're bound to have challenges, okay? You're bound to have certain things that you need to resolve, okay? So intelligence speaks to, it's contextual, and it speaks to being able to effectively solve problems in your context and to adapt to your context, okay? So now with the world of work that we have, the world of work, I think when I started lecturing, and the world of work now, and I've seen over the years as well with the students that I've taught, that things have changed, okay? Back then, when I started lecturing, and my students actually then who would graduate then, what they were confronted with in the world of work and what some of you will confront in the world of work is totally different. Because the world of work has also evolved and it has changed. So ultimately, with occupational intelligence, it speaks to you being able to adapt to the world of work that you're going to find yourself in, okay? It speaks to you being able to adapt effectively if you are going to find yourself maybe in a company or managing people. How are you going to effectively manage the people? How are you going to effectively manage different stakeholders, okay? So occupational intelligence speaks to that, okay? But also the fact of the matter is that with occupational intelligence as well, there are certain skills, soft skills, that you can start harnessing, okay? These are universal skills that you can harness, which can definitely allow you to adapt. Because occupational intelligence, it's about adaptation, okay? How do I effectively adapt in this occupation, in this world of work, in this context, okay? But in any given context, you have these universal soft skills that allow you to effectively adapt, okay? Can anyone maybe tell me what these soft skills might be that you think might help you to adapt? Because we've established here intelligence. People who are intelligent, they're able to solve problems in that context. And solving problems is a sign of adaptation to that context, okay? So what are some of the soft skills? Okay. So interpersonal skills. Okay, so interpersonal skills, definitely good. It's one of the skills, okay? There's a hand here. Communication skills, okay? So you need to be able to articulate yourself clearly. You need to be able to convey your message clearly, okay? Good. I think there was a hand. I think you wanted to say that, okay. Communication, okay, good. Emotional intelligence, okay? So you need to have emotional intelligence, okay? Which we're going to delve into. Emotional intelligence known as EQ, okay? Emotional intelligence, okay? Okay, so critical thinking speaks to the fact that you think outside the box. You critique things. You don't look at things and just accept them on face value. Okay, so that's critical thinking. And you've also indicated that critical thinking and being able to collaborate. Okay, so partnerships, okay? Any other thoughts? Being versatile. So being versatile speaks to the fact that you are flexible. You adapt, okay? Right. So ultimately, all these soft skills that you've indicated, they do relate definitely to you having a high level of occupational intelligence. Okay. But I'm going to focus on one of the skills. Okay. I'll touch on most of these skills, but I want to focus on one of the skills, which is known as emotional intelligence. Okay. EQ. Okay. Emotional intelligence. So we don't have a clicker here. Okay. Because now I'm. Okay, no, it's fine. Because I like walking up and down. Okay. Okay, all right, so, all right. Okay, all right, oh, thank you. All right, so there's the clicker. Let's see. Okay, no, good, all right, thank you. All right, yeah, so with the skills that I indicated, okay, so we have some of the workplace skills that are key, right? So you have emotional intelligence known as EQ, right? And this form of intelligence It's actually quite currently in the world of work. A lot of scholars, a lot of practitioners feel that this skill is what will differentiate you. Okay, it's a key skill, emotional intelligence. Okay, and then obviously attitude. You need to display the right attitude, and then you also have the notion of professional conduct, and then you also have the notion of communicating effectively. Okay, so with EQ, emotional intelligence. Okay. Can anyone maybe tell me what EQ is? Literally, because I've defined intelligence, right? Or you have defined intelligence for me. So EQ, okay? I'll get to you later because you are the one who came up with it, okay? All right. Okay. So being able to manage your own emotions and the emotions of others, okay? Right? Okay. Uh, okay. So it is an element of self-awareness, and that, in a way, helps you know your strength. Okay? All right? Maybe you can expand on it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Good. All right. No, I think all of you, what you've indicated, is correct. Okay. You've highlighted what EQ speaks to. So EQ, emotional intelligence, it speaks to. So you have within emotional intelligence, you have sort of two forms or two facets of intelligence. You have intrapersonal intelligence. Okay. Intra means you being aware of yourself. Okay. And then you have interpersonal intelligence. So for you to be able to effectively manage or for you to be able to identify emotions in other people, it speaks to the fact that you should also be able to identify emotions in you. Okay. So you can only see and you can only feel, you can only empathize, okay, pertaining to something that you can also relate to. Okay. So with EQ, with this notion of EQ, it speaks to the fact that all of us, it's always important to go through this introspection. Okay. We need to go through introspection. We need to understand our emotions. We need to know who we are. Okay. We need to be mindful of our own emotions and what they do to us. Okay. And once we're able to comprehend and to understand our emotions, okay, it also means that we are able afterwards to sort of regulate our emotions. So the first thing is that you need to be self-aware. Okay. Emotional intelligence speaks to the fact that you need to be self-aware. Okay. In the world of work nowadays, where we live in a world where it's all about collaboration, teamwork, first thing is that you have to be self-aware. You have to know yourself. Who are you? Who are you? Okay. Who am I? What do I like? Okay. What makes me happy? Okay. What makes me angry? Okay. So you need to be aware of your emotions and not shy away from those emotions. Okay. And after only being able to comprehend your emotions effectively, that's when you can manage the emotions. Okay. So you will know that if I find myself in a situation like this triggers me. Okay. So ideally, I should just do this. Okay. This is my coping mechanism. Okay. So now that speaks now to you managing your emotions. And then lastly, once you are able to sort of identify your emotions, manage your emotions, it means that you can also see emotions in other people. Okay. So people who have a high level of EQ, okay, which speaks to occupational intelligence, they're able to see and to read the emotions in other people. Okay. So when they're in a team, when they're collaborating in a team, okay, when they're working with other people, they're actually able to sort of sense and get a feel of how other people are feeling. So they can empathize. So it speaks to the notion that they can fully empathize with other people. And once you find yourself in a context where you can empathize, then you're able to build effective relationships. Okay. So you can only build effective relationships once you know yourself, for starters. Thereafter, once you're also able to regulate your emotions, and also once you're able to empathize, that's when you can build effective relationships. Okay. So with EQ, so I think this is, so these are the dimensions of emotional intelligence. So you have self-awareness, self-control, self-motivation, okay? You can only motivate yourself effectively, okay? Once you are at a point where you can control yourself. You can control the person within you, okay? And then afterwards, you also have empathy. And then after empathy, you have building effective relationships, okay? So in the current world of work, if I also think from way back, the people that I've engaged with, students that I've engaged with at Rhodes, even here at UP, because I've been here at UP for more than 6 years, so it's my 7th year here. So even here, I've engaged with a lot of students and so on, and if I look back at some of the students that I've mentored, that I've engaged with, the ones who I could tell have sort of high levels of emotional intelligence. And with EQ, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be talkative, okay? You have to be a person when you go out, you're the loudest person. Or you're the last person to leave the bar if you go to bars, right? Doesn't mean that, okay? EQ. You can have a person who's reserved, who's very calm, who's very quiet, but they can have a high level of EQ, okay? So through my observations over the years, people or students or individuals who I've seen that take time to know who they are, who are authentic, right? Who acknowledge that this is what they want, this is what they dislike, okay? Those are people that I noted in the past, that these are people who actually know who they are, okay? And I also noted that such individuals, to a large extent, they also take time to understand other people, and that speaks to empathizing, okay? And in that context, even if they are reserved, or even if they are talkative, they are still able to build effective relationships, okay? So one of the students that I actually did in my first year of lecturing, who I mentored, he was the SRC president at Rhodes, and then later on, I also taught him as well. And yeah, with time, and I could see, because even now when I look back, he had a high level of EQ. After just finishing his undergrad, he got a job, very good job in government. And then he came back, he did his postgrad, and currently he's doing very well in government, okay? And he's actually a very reserved person, okay? Not talkative, not loud, but through my interactions, I picked it up that this gentleman, back then, he had a high level of EQ. So EQ, definitely, in the world of work, whatever discipline you find yourself in, if you have a high level of EQ, okay, and it just speaks to you knowing yourself. Take time to know yourself, okay? Know who you are. And in a way, that will actually help you build better relationships with other people, okay? So I think I've touched on EQ, okay? What it does. Why is it important, okay? Definitely it helps you be a good team player, okay? Collaborate, okay? It also helps you solve problems effectively, okay? And also with EQ as well, it also helps you resolve conflicts. The fact of the matter is, for you, later on when you're working in a given company or when you are running your own companies, you're bound to have conflicts. Conflicts are inevitable in life, okay? And the people who tend to prosper in life generally, people who tend to prosper in their occupations, are people who have a good way of managing conflict, okay? So, and with conflict at times, you shouldn't be a person who takes, yes, we can take things a bit personal, right? You're hurt, you can feel a bit of pain, right? But ultimately, you have to manage it. How you take things, you know, how you relate to insults, how you relate to disappointments, and so on, okay? Entrepreneurs who are very effective entrepreneurs are people who, to a large extent, yes, they're risk-taking, but they're people who are able to pick themselves up after failure, okay? So failure is inevitable, okay? And failure and disappointment. But ultimately with EQ, it helps you in a context where you are having a disagreement with a person to be able to resolve that conflict effectively, okay? All right, are we all fine? Okay. And then I think lastly, I'll just touch on the notion of working towards a pleasant interpersonal workplace. I think I've indicated you need to know the self, okay? You need to understand your own temperament, okay? So some of you are now transitioning from being scholars to being professionals, okay? Make sure, I urge you, make sure you know your temperament, okay? Try, give yourself time to know who you are, okay? That notion of introspection, okay, it's important, okay? And then also, it's also important to, once you know who you are, you're also able to relate with other people, okay? To understand emotions in other people. And that will definitely allow you, okay? In this new world of work, which is a world of work where I think, we're currently in the fourth industrial revolution, right? The digital revolution. It's a world of work with a lot of dynamics, okay? Some of you, I'd assume, you are part of Generation Z, right? Generation Z, okay? According to the Americans, Generation Z. But we would say Generation Z, okay? So I can see a lot of you, you are part of that generation. And your expectations, your outlook towards life is different from other generations. It's different from Generation Y. Most of you, when you start working, some of the people who you're going to be working with are people within Generation Y and X, okay? So your Generation X, currently, they're now at the top, okay? There are people now in their 50s, 55 and above. And their worldview is totally different, okay? Generation Y, okay, they're also different, how they look at the world. So ultimately, I would also urge you that through EQ, through knowing yourself, you'll be able to navigate your interactions with different generations, okay? For me as an academic, when I started off, I didn't have, it was mostly Generation Y that I taught, okay? But I remember, even when I came to UP, or even when I was still at Rhodes just before I came here, I was taken aback by the behavior of some of the students. And this spoke to the fact that these students were part of Generation Z, Generation Z. And certain things that we would not do, I was seeing them happening, okay? Certain, tones and people engaging with me in a certain way that we would not do. Some students were now engaging with me in that manner, okay? But I had to adapt, okay? But ultimately for you as well, when you move into the world of work, even when you navigate running your business and so on, be cognizant of the fact that your EQ is important. It will help you navigate your interactions with the different generations, okay? All right, and I do wish you all the best. For the new scholars, I wish you all the best, and for the scholars who might be transitioning, right, into the world of work, I also wish you all the best, eh? Okay, thank you.
Perhaps we should ask if you wouldn't leave us so quickly. Any questions in the room, we'll be happy to take them now to make sure that we all get the best out of this conversation we're having on emotional intelligence. If you could just please get another mic from the back, if you can just have some roving mics. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand so we can make sure that we complete this segment having gotten the very best of it as well.
Hi, Dr. Ndoro. Thank you for that talk. So my question is, going into the workplace, values will always be emphasized before you start, right? The values of the organization or the company, and teamwork and collaboration are things that are usually stated. But I feel like there's sometimes is a disconnect between the work culture as well as the values of the organization. Okay. So how do you bridge that gap as a person coming into that space?
Okay. All right, good. Yeah, good question. Okay, maybe I can answer it, or... Okay, you're just a runner, okay. All right, so you've asked a very good question. So your question actually, it speaks to the fact that for any organization, right, they are, so org culture, organizational culture, it's, so the tenets, the building blocks of culture are values, okay? But you have organizations that claim that they have this culture, okay? But in reality, that culture is not in line with actually the values that you actually experience when you get there. So for me, when I look at EQ, and if I look at the world of work, and if I look at occupational intelligence, the first thing is for you to be able to identify the values that are being embedded in that company. Okay. Those values actually speak to the culture of that company. And ultimately, my take is that when you're in the world of work and you have values that are not in line with your own values, okay? Because I think that also speaks to what you're highlighting, that you might apply for a company, and the values of that company might be values that you feel that you resonate with. But in actual fact, when you go there, it's different, okay? For me, ultimately, I would say that with EQ, okay, with your own professional conduct, with your emotional intelligence, I would say that will help you navigate, build effective relationships. Because with values, the challenge with values, because I don't want to be negative here, okay? I'm trying to avoid that. The challenge with values is that you cannot easily change them, okay? So if you get employed in a company that has certain values, right? And those values are the tenets, they're the building blocks of that company. For you to change those values is difficult, okay? Because values are always articulated by your top management, okay? So I would always argue that in this world of work for all of you, make sure that you're employable, employability. If you find yourself in a situation where there are values that you can't really adapt to, if you're very employable, okay, then yeah, you can transition to another organization. Yeah, but with values to change them, I don't want to lie, it's difficult, okay? But the notion of employability is key, okay? Right? Just try to make yourself employable. Try to make yourself adaptable, because the world of work, trust me, it has changed. You might be a person who I know of people who studied philosophy. Because when I was teaching psychology, I would also have students who had majors in philosophy, but they would take psychology. Some of those students, I found them now working at F&B in banks, right? But they studied philosophy. Even students who studied engineering, some of them, they found themselves in banks. So I think for me, my take is just try to be employable as much as possible, yeah. Because your question, it's a difficult question, but to navigate, yeah, with values, you can't really change them, okay? Yeah, okay? But good question. Okay.
I wanted to ask in terms of when you're in a workplace, because, okay, this is the problem that I have. Yes. I tend to fail to hesitate, like I don't hesitate to disagree in a conversation, right? So if we're having like a conversation and there's management, and at this point, I just keep quiet because I realize that even though they may ask that, okay, what can we improve, what can we do, and then you say something, it's not always appreciated. So at this point, I just keep quiet, but how would you handle a situation like that? Do you always just keep quiet, or where do you say your point, and how do you say it in a way that it's not disrespectful to the other parties?
Okay, all right. So where do you draw the line? Okay, all right. Okay, so ultimately, if I also think with my engagement in meetings, in management meetings and so on, people who I've seen who are able to convey their points effectively, they tend to be people who, for starters, they tend to be people who you can tell are active listeners, okay? So in a meeting, in an engagement, if people can tell that you're an active listener, you are taking time to listen to them. Because taking time to listen to someone is also a sign of respect. Subconsciously, they'll feel that you're respecting them, okay? So it's key, I would say, to be an active listener. And even as an active listener as well, it's always easy, if you're an active listener, if you want to now say something, people tend to give you the flow, okay? But also as well, in meetings as well, because you're bound at times to have meetings where you have people who talk a lot, they won't give you a chance. And in those cases, it's always also important to interject, to just tell them that, okay, please, can I now talk? Can it also be my turn? But for me, what I know generally is that being an active listener, in situations where you have people who might take stuff personal, people who are difficult to engage with, subconsciously as humans, when we see that someone is taking time to listen, we can also tell that they're respecting us, okay? And we will give them the platform, subconsciously, okay? And at times, you talk to someone, but you can tell that even before you're done talking, they already have an answer. Yeah. That obviously will result in you just now bulldozing as well, okay? So the issue of active listening, and active listening as well, it also falls under the umbrella of emotional intelligence. Try to be an active listener, okay? You might have stuff that you have in mind, but just try to a large extent to actively listen, and that speaks to empathy. Yeah. It's empathy, actually, because you're empathizing, okay? So I would say that could be a good tool. Engage in active listening, and when people are not giving you a chance, you just have to interject. and tell them that, can I also now talk? Okay. And also, it also boils down to the context. Context. Look at the jargon, how people talk as well, because at times you might be in a context where now you're using first-name basis, right? And to your superiors, and they might find it to be insulting. But in another context, they're comfortable with that. So the jargon, try to read the situation as well, because we're all different. The jargon that you have to use, how you're supposed to talk, I think that's quite key. But yeah, try to be an active listener. Okay.
Hi.
Okay, I can't see. Oh, you're here.
Hi. Thank you so much for what you're sharing with us today. I think it's quite useful. I just also got an extra question from what you were saying now, but I'll just get to my question real quickly. But I just want to ask that, like, what if you're someone who, I tend to be someone, I'm very quick to first see what's wrong in a situation, right? Before you actually start, and it takes me a bit of time to then be more creative and think about what's right and stuff like that. So in those types of situations where you're in a meeting and like they're engaging in this very great idea and whatever, but you can already see where the major challenge will be. Sometimes in the workplace it gets taken as, why is he always seeing what's wrong? You know what I'm saying? Whereas in other institutions, you may find that they appreciate that. They're like, okay, he's going to see what we don't see. But what advice would you give in that situation? That's just an additional thing to relating to what you were talking about. But I actually really wanted to ask about conflict, right?
Okay, yes.
And I wanted to ask you that, like, in the workplace, sometimes what you tend to see is you find that, like, when you go in, there's this idea of teamwork, like she was saying, and so on and so forth. But, like, obviously, there's also a lot of competition. And when you come in, sometimes you seem like a threat because you know certain things and other people don't. So you'll be there, and you're busy sharing everything with people, what to do, and so on and so forth. On their side, they're looking at you like, we're not sharing anything with you. In fact, if anything, they even want to sabotage you. Now, is it a form of emotional intelligence? And would you encourage in that situation for you to also be like, I'm also going to keep certain things to myself? Because the truth of the matter is, if you're constantly sharing and they are not sharing anything with you, like, in fact, to some extent, you can tell that, like, so-and-so just wants me to fail. Like, is it advisable to also be sort of toxic in a way? Like, and be like, okay, I'm also going to, do my own thing. Thank you very much.
All right, no, good question. I think maybe just to answer that question, I think the fact of the matter is that humans, we are competitive, okay? Humans, I think, for our default, I think even all of us, from the moment we're in grade 1, in some schools, already there was this notion of grading. Are you number 1? Are you number 2? Okay? It might be sports, it might be athletics. So through our socialization, okay, we've been socialized to be competitive, okay, in this world, okay? Through our socialization, you want to look good. You want to always look smarter, even dress code-wise, and so on, right? So the world we live in, from day one, the moment we are toddlers, as we are growing up, you're told, okay, this person he can play soccer, or she can do this and that. So that notion of competition, excelling, being better than the other, is part of our socialization, right? So we cannot be naive regarding that. And in any given context we find ourselves in, owing to that orientation, that humans that we have of being competitive, that notion of competition will always kick in, okay? But the key in workplaces that are effective, okay, some of the most effective workplaces in this day and age are maybe let me say companies. Companies like your Google, right? Google, they're doing very well, even up until now. Companies like your Amazon. And over the years, through research, through empirical research, such companies that tend to excel very well, like your Google and a lot of your tech companies, they tend to have a flat structure. The workplace is flat, okay? They don't have a lot of hierarchies. Even dress code when they go to work. Some people actually just wear jeans and T-shirts, right? And even at Google, I hear some people actually go, they skate to work. They have skateboards, okay? So in that context, you can see that when you have a flat structure, and a flat structure speaks to the notion that you are trying to minimize competition as much as possible. And in those contexts, in those companies, those are the companies that tend to do very well, to excel. So to get to what you're indicating, empirically, ideally, yes, you can be in a context where you feel that there's a lot of competition. But trust me, helping out, being collaborative, in the long term, it will add value, okay, in the long term. To some extent, in the short term, you might find that, some people are stealing your ideas and so on and so on. But ideally, the more you help, actually with helping, you're actually helping yourself at times, okay. So I know it's difficult. I know in the short term, there'll be some hard lessons, but ideally, I must be pragmatic. Ideally, the notion of being collaborative, you go far. Okay, yeah. Be collaborative, yeah. Companies where there's collaboration are companies that are the most successful companies today, okay?
Okay. All right. The question that I had was like, how can someone improve their emotional intelligence when they've been working remotely maybe for like over 6 years or 7 years?
Okay, good, yeah. So ultimately with emotional intelligence, it speaks to skills. Any given skill, you can learn a skill, okay? So EQ, it's a skill. And with any given skill, the good thing is that it's not a predisposition that is inherent. There's certain things like even our, your physical appearance, okay? Be it your complexion, your height, and so on. It's genetic, right? And that's who you are, okay? And you should love that, okay? But with skills like your EQ, it's a skill that you can acquire with time. And how can you acquire that skill? Okay, when you're working remotely, okay, you're working remotely. In reality, actually, even when you're working remotely, you also have electronic emotional intelligence, okay? So there's also that notion of your electronic emotional intelligence. I've been in situations where I engage even with some of my students, some of my postgrad students, via Zoom, okay? And the aura, I can tell even even at times when we're chatting, okay? So at times you have to chat and say whatever you're saying in those chat boxes, okay? It might be a Google Meet, it might be Zoom. But at times I've seen even the terminology that some people use in that context. You ask yourself that, but this you'd rather use this terminology with your friends, okay? Not in this context. So that's also a sign of EQ. So that also speaks to that electronic EQ. So even in this digital world, we are still interacting. But we still need to be cognizant of who we are. But digitally, definitely, there is EQ in the digital world as well. Okay. Right.
Good afternoon. Mine is not a question. Mine is a tactic that I think I'd like to put out there. There's a speaker who spoke about having to disagree and make sure that the management or the people who are listening don't end up having a negative notion towards you. I think a tactic that I've seen is reinforcing a person's contribution, even when you don't agree with it. So when you start the conversation with reinforcing what they say and making them realize that you acknowledge it and it's a great idea, then you add to them, say, actually with that great idea, how about? So by mentioning that you acknowledge their contribution and then showing a positive reaction to it and then giving yours, even though they might not want to agree with you, the way that you have navigated to disagreeing gives them very little room to be negative towards you. So whether they will adopt your contribution or not, the way that you would have navigated to disagree will make them still appreciate you after the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, good. And that actually speaks to active listening. Because in a way, you've actually shown the other person that you were hearing what they were saying. So you're acknowledging what they were saying, you get them, but this is what you have to say. Okay. So it's that active listening, which I know, and for all of you, I think you've experienced that. Some people, when you're talking to them already, you can see he or she has an answer already. That's a lack of active listening there. Okay?
Okay, good afternoon, Prof. My question is, how do we navigate the issues of racism, especially as junior employees, where you want to stand up for yourself, but you don't want to sound disrespectful?
Okay, so how do you navigate the issues of racism? Okay, so racism, okay, very hot topic, okay, very hot topic. So how do you navigate the issues of racism? I think the sad reality is that in this world we live in, there are people who hold views that that discriminate. Okay, so there are some people who can have views that that actually maybe racist views actually, or sexist views and so on. So that we can also not overlook. Okay, we live in a world that naturally, but I think for me, I always argue that ultimately we should understand that in this world we live in, as humans, the way we try to process information, we try to place things in brackets, okay? That helps us comprehend situations. So we tend to use stereotypes, okay? So we generalize. So we say people like Zulu people are like this, okay? Indian people are like this. And it's a way of simplifying the world because we're always bombarded by a lot of information. So for you, at times, or for a human being, to take time to try to comprehend, to take time to understand a certain person, the easiest thing to do is to look at that person on face value. How do they look? What characteristics do they have? And then you just have a label, okay? So yes, racism does exist, okay? I mean, owing to the fact that there have been a lot of movements that speak to racism and so on. And in fact, at Rhodes, I used to actually teach a module on workplace diversity. And we would touch on all forms of discrimination and how to manage discrimination. I would say, definitely. And I think, yeah, a lot of people have experienced it. Some have not, some have. And it's a form of discrimination, okay, one way or the other. My take is ultimately in a context where you are faced with any form of discrimination. For starters, know yourself, okay? Love yourself. Acknowledge who you are, okay? Have self-belief, okay? The fact that someone looks at you and immediately assume that because you are in this race or whatever, you are less capable, that will not materialize if you are a person also at times who is taking time to fully know who you are, love who you are, and have self-confidence, okay? Because definitely negativity, the sad reality is that we will meet negativity in life. But that shouldn't define us. And through self-knowledge, self-awareness, you also get to a point where you instill confidence in yourself. Okay. And then obviously you have to speak out as well. Yeah. Yeah, that's my take. Any form of discrimination, it might be racism, sexism, and so on, I feel that it's important to speak out. Yeah. Okay. For your own conscience as well. Okay. So yeah, so that's my take. Yeah.